We're going to go back a couple of thousand years so we can think for a bit upon that very first Christmas. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time in 1977. And then we're going to go back again to the 14th century. And then we'll return to the present so we can take a little peek into the future. But here's where we have to veer off course for a little bit, specifically for 11 o'clock. Because I want to start in 1977. And at 5 and 7, it worked okay to connect us a little bit with the music. But I noticed before we got to this part of the service that several of you were yawning, Jeff, Alice, not to mention any names, Jason Rosenbaum. But as I was counting how many of you were yawning, I myself yawned 3 times. So just to kind of get you back on track, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and it might come your way, so you just need to pay attention for the next 60 seconds. Talking about 1977, instead of going to music, I thought we might go to where some of us live, because it doesn't matter where we were living then, we shared something in common. I was living in Flagstaff, Arizona, and this kind of depressed me a little bit, because as I was scanning all of us tonight, I realized, okay, so Alice wasn't even born yet, Susie wasn't even born yet, so I had to skip by some of the familiar faces that I've known for a long, long time, and then I thought, well, I need to go with some of the older guys, at least my age, that wouldn't be afraid to answer in public. So Dennis Bayshore, where were you living in 1977? Is he talking to me? Yes. Here. Okay, in Texas. All right, well then I went over here, and then I realized, okay, so Chris isn't alive yet, Callie's not alive yet. Bruce Osley, where were you living in 1977? California. Norm Roberts, where were you living in 1977? Arlington, Texas. So my son, he's not born yet. My associate in ministry, not born yet. Golly. I know. Megan, not born yet. Lindsay, not born yet. Kathy Reset, where were you living in 1977? Which part? Encino. That was before we knew each other, huh? That's right. So, if you were alive in 1977, one of the things, regardless of where you were living, that we all had the ability to see, whether we were paying attention to it or not, was something that has not happened again until tonight. Some of you may immediately know what I'm talking about, and it's the moon. This is the first time there has been a full moon on Christmas since 1977, 38 years ago. Kind of interesting. According to the Weather Channel, tonight's Christmas moon, and it has some nicknames. It's also called the cold moon. It's also called the long night's moon, because it comes so close, I think, to the winter solstice. It will hit its peak at about 6:11 a.m., which means for us here in the United States, the best time to really catch it and to see it is tonight. I don't know if you have taken a peek up yet, heard about it, noticed it. You still have plenty of time. Clear, clear skies. And it is brilliant. It is brilliant. So I was thinking about some of the things about the moon before I get to the theological metaphor that I'd like to share with you. And the first thing I thought of was the old Dean Martin song, remember it? When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. So you guys are tracking really well. That's good. And if you do fall asleep, it's okay. But the other one was a blessing that I don't know where I learned it, but it's kind of a children's rhyme. And then I heard later tonight that it's also a little bit of a song. I often say it when I have any of my grandkids with me on a full moon. It's where you look at the moon and you say, I see the moon and the moon sees me. God bless the moon and God bless me. You know it, Sherry Wade. So that's kind of a neat thing to teach any little ones that you have in your life. So it was a star, not a moon. And we know that. It was a star that God used to mark this very unique, specific time in history when Jesus was born. But even though tonight I'm drawing your attention to the moon, isn't it a little bit of a gift that we have an extra reason to turn our heads and our faces upward into the heavens and to be able to see, and it's hard to miss, the wonderful metaphor, just the reminder that God's love is still, no matter what's going on in your life or in the world right now, still shining bright upon this old world of ours and has every single generation from the beginning. And I hope maybe that's something that we can absorb a little bit and appreciate some tonight. And it's good to go back to that first Christmas. And one of the first things that strikes me is the simplicity of it. And I want to speak up for one person that's often talked about in the Christmas story, especially in children's programs, that I think got kind of a bad rap. And more importantly, it leads us into another helpful metaphor. But I've always thought that it was unfair that the innkeeper gets portrayed in negative ways, especially when you consider the fact that when you read through the Christmas gospel, there is no innkeeper. It's not even mentioned. It never has been. We just sort of created it, sort of like the three kings. There's no mention of three kings. We just sang about it and we think it's in there somewhere. It's not. But we all, I think, get the reference and we understand the inference that there had to be somebody that answered the door, right? It's either the person who owned the inn or maybe whoever was in charge that night. And they're the one that made the decision to offer the stable. And tonight, what I say to myself, and I'm suggesting to you, is that although it may seem like it was not much, it was enough, right? Everything turned out okay that night. In fact, it turned out more than okay. And so what I would invite you to do this evening is to think of your life as a stable. And I'm not exactly sure what all directions you might want to take it, but if a stable, think of the stable you often visualize that Joseph and Mary spent that first Christmas in with the baby Jesus. If that stable represents your life, that means it includes your faith for whatever shape it's in. It includes who you are as a person. It reflects what you do and what you haven't done. And you don't even have to think very long, or at least I don't, to realize, well, there's a lot of things that need attention that I haven't gotten to yet. And then if my relationships are somehow symbolized in this stable, then there are certainly times when it gets pretty messy in there and not always very pleasant. And then that in turn opens us up to, I think, a wonderful part of this miraculous story, which is this: that's exactly where Jesus wants to be. Right smack dab in the middle of your life, whether it's messy or not. The other part of the miracle is this: even though Jesus has said again and again in the scriptures and throughout history has made it clear that even though he is willing and able to abide within us and to work through us, even if our lives are a bit humble or a bit messy, in order for us to really fully experience the fullness of that miracle, it really is helpful to have some times like this, where we just slow down a bit and quiet ourselves long enough in order to really fully appreciate the blessings of the connections that gives us, to know that we're all connected to each other. And that now, for eternity, we are connected to Him, the creator of everything, the creator of the stars, the moon, every single person we've ever known. Which is maybe why this The Psalms especially, and the scriptures often have verses like, "So be still and know that I am God." Or in our music, Christmas hymns, like the one where the verse says, "It is often silently, so very silently, that the wondrous gifts are given." If there is one gift that tonight's expression of the gospel can give to you, I would want it to be this. And I think it's actually probably God's hope for all of us. That we would have the peace that comes in knowing that all shall be well. It's such a simple phrase, but if you really believe this, it totally changes the way you live your life and the way you see the world and the way you look at the future. If you understand that through Him, all will be well. This is not a new phrase. Julian of Norwich, a woman, a mystic, a Christian, said this back in the 14th century. In fact, she said it again and again and again. And everybody that read her writings and listened to her teachings found it incredibly helpful, because during that time in history, if you've done any reading at all, you might remember some of these things. I mean, things have always been difficult in the world, and we have our share of violence and terrorism and war and all kinds of things. And that was multiplied even more in the 14th century. They had all of those things. They also happened to have one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. You might have heard of something called the Black Death. It ended up killing over 75 million people, which is hard to wrap your mind around. But for me, it helps to more deeply appreciate that in the midst of all of this, that she is able to say that all shall be well. She did not lose her hope. She did not lose her peace. And back then, that took an act of faith. But we also know it still does. Doesn't it? Still takes an act of faith to believe, even today, that all will be well. Things have gotten a whole lot better than they were in the 14th century, and yet, after all that time, the kind of pain and misery that's caused by fear and anger and hatred is still very much with us. Fills the news. We're all affected by it in different ways. And yet it's our faith that continues to sustain us. That's the thread throughout all of those years. And sometimes when you loop back, you pick up things that are helpful for you now. I think back to 1977, and I guess it just sort of hooked my imagination this week, because there's so many random coincidences. You know, not only is this the first time we're having a Christmas moon since 1977, it's also interesting to me that during these past few days, movie theaters have been packed with people who are going to see Star Wars. Do you know when that first happened? 1977. And it's like, it's happening all over again. And it's wonderful. It's delightful. I've been one of those people who couldn't wait. It's been so exciting. And then you talk to someone who's already seen it, and you go, oh my gosh, can you... And we know that's just a story. But I think part of the power of it is not just that it's a story well told, but we realize that it's a story that's still unfolding. And isn't that a bit like ours? Still happening. It's pretty amazing. It's miraculous. And so I'd like you to think a bit then about the future. Took a little look at the past. Take a little look at the future. And do this for the world. And maybe it's good for our souls as well. The next time there's going to be a Christmas moon, The world doesn't have to wait 38 years. In fact, it happens in half the time. I didn't quite understand the mathematics of that, but the next Christmas moon is in 19 years. It'll be 2034. And I think it would be a good spiritual exercise for all of us in our own way, privately, to say a little prayer for the future. To say a little prayer. Because that too can be an act of faith, especially if we link it with a commitment that we make to God and to ourselves, that in whatever way possible we are able to, that we will continue, much like the moon, to reflect the light of God's love, and that we will do whatever we can to help fight this ongoing battle against things like anger and fear and hatred and all the things that divide the world and bring out the worst in us. Every single one of us here can make a difference in that fight. I'm optimistic. I believe this, that 19 years from now, your kids and your grandkids, I absolutely believe that they're going to be facing challenges that we haven't even imagined yet. But that's okay, because their faith too will sustain them. I'm so optimistic that I believe that 19 years from now, in the year 2034, that the Texas Rangers will have won their first World Series. I'm an optimistic guy. We don't really know. But there are some things we believe. And on Christmas Eve, this is what we believe. That on that very first one, the light of God's love was brought into our world through a baby named Jesus. This is something we believe, that though all of us are still affected by the darkness that surrounds us and is also within us, that it will be God's love that gives us the strength and the hope that we need. It'll be God's love that gives us the courage and the peace that He wants for all of us. And it will be God's love that gives us the faith that we need to believe and to love, and on nights like this to sing. And people with those gifts have given us the words, and tonight those words are this: to sing this Christmas and every Christmas that all shall be well. All shall be well, for in that stable and in yours, Jesus is born.